nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Alt?
Here.
Mr. Beistel? Mr. Calero?
Here.
Mrs. Love? Here. Mr. Miller? Mr. Pelikoski?
Here.
Mrs. Rhodes? Here. Mrs. Shipley? Mr. Benz?
Here.
Taylor Sipas? Sage Gwynn?
Let the record show that Mrs. Shipley telephoned earlier. She is ill this evening.
So it's 8 present with 2 student reps also. Citizens' comments.
Lydia Nelson.
Good evening. My name is Lydia Nelson, and my son is Isaac Nelson. Like all other parents in the Southmoreland School District, each day we send our children to school, believing that adults to whom they are entrusted at all levels will be kept safe. Over $14,000 per student of taxpayer money is spent to ensure a safe educational program. Unfortunately, I know better. Tonight, I have one critical question. What are your priorities as you spend $26 million this year? You have announced that Southmoreland needs to apply for a grant to supply our facilities with adequate working security cameras. A grant is something you may or may not get. On the other hand, you spend $1 million on a football field. You budget another $750,000 for sports and activities. You spend $2 million each year on administrators, several of whom fail to live up to their responsibilities to keep our children safe. You spend millions on a maintenance shed. You spend multiple millions of dollars on a Mr. Rogers neighborhood look-alike building. Yet, for all of this spending, Southmoreland parents cannot trust that our children will be safe. As I see it, at the top of your priority list is football and sports, huge administrative salaries, fancy facilities, air-conditioned sheds, and other frills. My personal experience shows that student safety is at the bottom of your list. Why do students' safety depend on a grant? Why were the cameras and other monitoring devices not working? As a mother, I think it's way past time you stop this ridiculous spending and focus on the students. You, the elected board members, have the responsibility to ensure our children's safety. Have you people been sleeping? What have you done to make sure safety is a top priority? Why do you blindly follow the administration thinking they will handle this appropriately? One way or another, my concerns and those of Southmoreland parents will be answered. You cannot imagine how you're focused on repairing a football field, but not repairing security cameras to ensure student safety has horrifically scarred my family for life. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Nelson.
Minutes.
It is recommended that the board approve the minutes of the September 4 and September 11, 2014 meetings.
Need a motion, please? Motion by Mrs. Rhodes, second. Second by Mr. Calero. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes 8-0 with 1 absent. Business and Finance Funds Accounts.
It is recommended that the board approve the August 2014 Treasurer's Report and the September 2014 bills payable.
Need a motion? Motion by Mr. Beistel, second. Second by Mr. Miller. Questions? Roll call, please.
Mr. Alt?
Yes.
Mr. Beistel?
Yes.
Mr. Calero?
Yes.
Mrs. Love? Yes. Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Polakowski?
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodes? Mr. Benz?
Yes, motion passes 8-0 with one absent. Seeing no old business, new business,
It is recommended that the board authorize administration to advertise bids for reconfiguring the entryway to Southmoreland High School to provide additional security.
need a motion?
Make a motion.
Motion by Mr. Polakowski, second. Second by Mrs. Rhodes. Questions? Roll call, please.
Mr. Beistel?
Yes.
Mr. Calero?
Yes.
Mrs. Love? Mr. Miller? Mr. Polakowski?
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodes? Mr. Alt?
Yes.
Mr. Benz?
Yes, motion passes 8-0 with one absent. Approve the acceptance of athletic donations.
It is recommended that the board approve donations of poles, fencing, and netting for the baseball field and the scoreboard for the SES SMS soccer field.
Need a motion? Motion by Mrs. Rhodes, second by Mr. Miller. Questions? Roll call, please.
Mr. Calero? Mrs. Love? Mr. Miller? Mr. Polakowski? Mrs. Rhodes? Mr. Alt?
Yes.
Mr. Beistel? Mr. Benz?
Yes, motion passes 8-0 with one absent. Policy 352.
It's recommended that the board authorize administration to post for 30 days policy 352, employee drug, alcohol, and substance abuse testing. And during the time that that is posted, we will certainly take into considerations the comments that were made last week's meeting, as well as the analysis of the solicitor, and we'll rework that before a final vote.
Need a motion? Motion by Mr. Calero, second.
Second.
Second by Mr. Polakowski. Questions? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Love? Mr. Miller? Mr. Polakowski?
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodes? Mr. Alt?
Yes.
Mr. Beistel? Mr. Calero? Mr. Benz?
Yes, motion passes 8-0 with one absent. WIU joint purchasing.
It is recommended that the board appoint Mr. James Marnell as representative to the Westmoreland Intermediate Joint Purchasing Committee and Mr. Charlie Swink as the alternate.
Need a motion? Motion by Mr. Beistel, second. Second by Mr. Miller. Questions? Roll call, please.
Mr. Miller? Mr. Polakowski?
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodes? Mr. Alt?
Yes.
Mr. Beistel? Mr. Calero? Mrs. Love? Mr. Benz?
Yes, motion passes 8-0 with one absent. WIU joint purchasing consortium.
It is recommended that the board authorize the Westmoreland Intermediate Unit Joint Purchasing Consortium to advertise for bids for the purchase of multipurpose paper, unleaded gasoline, and diesel fuel.
Need a motion? Motion by Mr. Beistel, second.
Second.
Second by Mr. Polakowski. Questions? Roll call, please.
Mr. Polakowski?
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodes? Mr. Alt?
Yes.
Mr. Beistel? Mr. Calero? Mrs. Love? Mr. Miller? Mr. Benz?
Yes, motion passes 8-0 with one absent.
It is recommended that the board approve Southmoreland's mission, vision, and goal statement for the 2014-15 school year. And based on our conversation last week, Dr. Scott's going to talk to you a little bit about some changes that were made to those statements.
The board brought up a very valid point about the work that we're doing with character, yet it wasn't showing up anywhere on the mission, vision, and goals, and we added a statement under our values section to address that, to add character development as part of our vision, which it is and which it should be intentionally stated.
So that will be added in. So we'll ask that you adopt that for the 14-15 school year.
Need a motion? Motion by Mr. Miller, second. Second by Mrs. Rhodes. Questions? Roll call, please.
It was a good discussion, I thought, last week. We talked about it. I certainly affirm this for keeping the primary what the school does best, which is an academic institution. The school is best for teaching the studies that we do, whether it's in math, science, the practical arts. That's what it does best. And it does that better than it can be apparent. The roles like that teachers do, but they do best as educators. But having said that, I think there are these character issues. What makes for good citizenship, what makes a community livable. I remember in 1988 when I first ran for the board. That puts me back quite a ways. But I was thinking of what makes this community, our kids, we'd lived here since 1970, and what makes this community a very livable community. And I read de Tocqueville's Democracy in America, and that goes back, Dr. Scott mentioned the book they're studying. I totally affirm that, what he was doing. But what he discovered, this was a Frenchman who visited here, this was almost 200 years ago, and what he discovered in trying to figure out what makes American society work, and this was pre the public schools, was the character of the American citizen, the civic character of belief in the virtues. That virtue is better than vice, that democracy is better than dictatorship, that being an education is better than not having an education. Those basic persistence, as he noted, that these are basic attributes that make life livable in East Huntington Township, in Everson, in Scottsdale, and in Upper Tyrone Township. So I really commend the administration and for teachers, parents, all of us in working together for the goals that are stated here in the mission. And I do think we're going in the right direction.
Any more comments or questions?
I wasn't clear, Dr. Scott, that's going to be listed under goals, that particular,
It's going to be under the vision piece.
under the vision part,
Yes.
under our vision.
Once we get that printed out, we'll make sure you all have copies of it for next month.
Any more? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Rhodes?
Yes.
Mr. Oak?
Yes.
Mr. Beistel? Mr. Calero?
Yes.
Mrs. Love? Mr. Miller?
Yes?
Mr. Polakowski?
Yes.
Mr. Benz?
Yes, motion passes 8-0 with one absent. Need a motion to recess for executive session for personnel.
I would have a discussion on tax litigation with Scottdale Housing LP, tax map number 3002060287 and 3002060391 and 3002060600, which is commonly referred to as Scottdale Court and is on Broadway Street. And a subsequent student discipline matter identified as number 102 for this year, not 101.
Need a motion, please? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? We'll reconvene. Personnel, addition to the day-to-day sublist.
It's recommended that the board approve additions to the day-to-day substitute list for the 2014-15 school year.
Need a motion? Motion by Mr. Miller, second. Second by Mrs. Rhodes. Question? Roll call, please.
Mr. Alt?
Yes.
Mr. Beistel? Mr. Calero?
Yes.
Mrs. Love? Mr. Miller? Mr. Polakowski?
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodes? Mr. Benz?
Yes, motion passes 8-0 with one absent. FMLA request.
It's recommended that the board approve an FMLA request for middle school family and consumer sciences teacher Barbara Straub from October 7th up to October 28th, 2014. That would be dependent upon her situation, her family situation. She may be able to return earlier.
Need a motion?
Make a motion.
Motion by Mr. Polakowski, second. Second by Mr. Beistel. Questions? Roll call, please.
Mr. Beistel? Mr. Calero? Mrs. Love? Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Polakowski?
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodes? Mr. Alt?
Yes.
Mr. Benz?
Yes, motion passes 8-0 with one absent. FMLA request.
It's recommended that the board approve an FMLA request for first grade teacher Amy Wolf for a period of up to 12 weeks, retroactive to September 26, 2014. And again, if her situation is such that she can return prior to that 12-week period. She certainly is anxious to do that.
Need a motion? Motion by Mrs. Rhodes, second. Second by Mr. Miller. Questions? Roll call, please.
Mr. Calero. Yes. Mrs. Love. Yes. Mr. Miller. Yes. Mr. Polakowski.
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodes. Yes. Mr. Alt.
Yes.
Mr. Beistel.
Yes.
Mr. Benz.
Yes, motion passes 8-0 with one absent. Student report.
Congratulations to September Scotty Scholar Isaac Roach. Congratulations also to September Spirit of Southmoreland student Nicholas Shawley. The Southmoreland administrators and Board of Education donated the following books to the Southmoreland High School Library in memory of Dolores J. Stoker, Elvis Presley, the Elvis Encyclopedia, and Bandfront. The college fair is scheduled for September 17th from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock at Westmoreland County Community College.
The Southmoreland varsity cheerleaders will be sponsoring the 2014 Homecoming Dance on October 30th from 6 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. The YEA News, the Hobgoblin Hike is on Friday, October 17th at Twin Lakes Park. National Honor Society is planning a food drive competition with Mount Pleasant that will culminate on the evening of the Mount Pleasant versus Southmoreland High School football game on October 24th. Harley Smith, Stacy Keeper, Jensen Miller, and Taylor Millslegel did child care professional observation at Bailey's Early Learning Center on Tuesday, September 23rd. It was part of their class requirements following state standards for family and consumer sciences, and they are considering careers that interact with children.
I just want to throw in, I saw the article in the paper. It was very informative about your future plans and what you're involved in, and I just want to throw out, if you're able and interested in coming to the first meeting, come and share your input if you want, or if we're discussing anything during the meeting, give input and feel free to get involved. Thank you. CWCTC report.
We met briefly on September 17th. There were only a few items on the agenda for the meeting. A couple of things. Permission was granted for Skills USA advisors and students to attend the Western Region Leadership Conference at Seven Springs, November 5th, 6th, and 7th, and that was for 29 students and 3 advisors, and that was paid from the Perkins grant. Granted permission for Beth Butala, presenter, Todd Bartlow, Jeff Geezy, presenter for 1 day, and Brad Elwood, presenter for 1 day, to attend the Integrated Learning Conference at Penn State. We approved the General Advisory Committee, approved the Occupational Advisory Committee, and we granted permission for Doug Walt, the masonry instructor, to attend the PCMA conference in York, PA. And that concludes my report.
We just had very few things on the list. We hired and did leave of absences. We did have a speaker come talk to us about a program that they put on last week on how they're going to try to show school districts how to get more money out of the government, like local and state government. So that's it.
Before I start my ESBA liaison report, I just wanted to pass this folder around. I put together. It was from the Mobile Agriculture Education Science Lab that was at the school, at the middle school there. I think it was at SES. It was at SES. Anyway, I attended, and they gave it like a 30-minute little program. And what they did was it was run by a lady, her name is Pam Augustine, and she had the students come in, and she passed out the lab sheets, and they filled out the lab sheets. And also, what else did they do? On the back of that lab sheet was the observation, the conclusion part of it. She passed the paper around, and then what they did was they colored with regular crayons, Crayola, and they also colored with what they called Prang crayons, and those crayons were made from soy. And she had them do that. And then what they actually did was they actually made the crayons. She had like a little mold, and she mixed up the materials that needed to be done, and she actually made the crayons. And I thought it was a good, nice learning experience for the children. There's a couple pamphlets in here if you want to take them out and look at them. I also have, I asked her, could I take some of the crayons? She gave me some of the crayons. It was very, and they do work, and they work. And then also the last page here shows you, there was an article in the paper, and it shows that they had covered it and pictures of some of the students in it and stuff. So it was very interesting. I know they were here about 5 years ago, and I can't remember what they did then, but it was very, I thought it was a good idea then, and I really enjoyed being part of it this year. So I'll pass this around. You guys can look at it when you want to look at that. Now on to the PSBA report. On September 30th, Dr. Molnar, Mr. Marnell, Mr. Miller, and myself attended the statewide virtual kickoff event for the campaign for fair education funding. We were one of 29 IU units across the state taking part. After brief introductions from Dr. Matta, our IU Executive Director, and Tom Gluck, the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Association of Intermediate Units, we heard from Jim Burkheit, who is the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Association of School Administrators, and Jay Himes, he's the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Association of School Business Officials. Among some of the issues discussed was that the current system for funding our schools is unfair to the students and the local taxpayers. It limits our state's economic future, and it generates higher taxes in the poorer districts. The current funding system is considered a failure of state government because it is inadequate, inequitable, unpredictable, unaccountable, and unsustainable. There have been no consistent funding formulas since 93-94. We were then introduced to the statewide campaign leader. Her name is Kathy Mandarino. She's the campaign manager. And Patrick Dowd, he's the executive director of the Allies for Children. And David Patty, he's the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Business Council. They all made brief comments echoing the previous mentioned concerns. After that, each IU then had breakout sessions to discuss the following questions. The first question was, what are the questions that we need to be able to answer in order to build public support of this effort? Number two, what are the myths about public education and public education funding to which we need to respond? Number three, what resources and information are needed to sustain involvement, engagement, leadership in this effort? And the last question, what do we need to do to get our public officials to support this effort? We were then divided into 4 groups, and there were 4 areas, each assigned one of the above questions. Each group would give input and or answers to the questions. After an allotted time period, we would then move to the next area. All the answers were recorded, and each district will get a copy later on. 4 IUs, 1 for each question, were selected to answer or give input on their question. The campaign for fair education funding was kicked off Monday, October 6th, and there was an article in the Tribune discussing pretty much what I just said. So let's see here. Okay, that was Monday, October 6th. That was just this Monday. And with more than 40 organizations taking part, the group includes educators, labor, business, and schools, to name a few. And then campaign manager Kathy Mandarino said, quote, "Every child deserves a chance to succeed. We need fair, sustainable, and predictable methods for funding public schools that recognizes the shared responsibility we all have and the shared benefits we all will receive. With every Pennsylvania child gets that when every Pennsylvania child gets that opportunity." As this campaign moves forward, I'll be reporting back on the progress and also what we need to do to support this effort. So that concludes my presentation.
As Mrs. Rose was talking, I circulated a printout of a PowerPoint that was given that evening. And the whole, or one of the big focuses here that that's trying to be accomplished, years ago, we had a state funding formula that we could count on. We knew exactly, how much money we were going to get in a given year. Lately, that formula has disappeared, and we seem to be, at the beck and call of however much money seems to be available. So the idea here is to reinstate a funding formula that's fair and equitable both to high wealth districts and low wealth districts as well. So we'll see how that all goes, but that was the gist of it. And Gail, thank you. Your report, I had a little blurb on it here. Yours was much more thorough than mine would have been, so thank you.
Superintendent's report.
As the first item I have this evening is a walk-on that we've actually discussed in executive session. This is in re-student discipline matter 2014-15, number 102. And we'll ask you to vote on this resolution. Be it resolved that the board hereby adopts the decision of the board as a committee of the whole, and that the adjudication in the matter of the above identified student disciplinary action be and hereby is ratified in all respects to the same extent as set forth therein as the action of the Board of School Directors of the Southmoreland School District, and the administration is directed to take all actions consistent herewith, and the secretary is to send copies of the adjudication and this resolution to the affected student and parent or guardian by certified mail.
Need a motion? Motion by Mr. Miller, second. Second by Mr. Polakowski. Questions? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Love?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Excuse me, we need to have public comment for something like this.
It's not an agenda item.
Is there any public comment?
Understand a word of what this motion is about. I'm sure it's good for the attorney and attorneys down the road, but if you could please just put that in English for me, thank you.
In English, Mr. Kiefer, this is a resolution dealing with a student disciplinary matter, 102 of 2014-15. That's all we're permitted to say. Continue, Mrs. Tarzan.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Polakowski?
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodes?
Yes.
Mr. Alt?
Yes.
Mr. Beistel? Mr. Calero? Mr. Benz?
Yes, motion passes with 8-0 and 1 absent.
I've prepared a report that's in a blue binder at your desk that attempts to answer most of the questions that were distributed several weeks ago. Those copies are at your respective places, so you may take those with you, peruse the questions and the answers, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions after you've had an opportunity to read. You can either call me or we can talk at a meeting.
I thank you for that, Jack.
You're welcome, Ken. You're welcome. The next item is a little report on, we have a county superintendent's group that meets on a pretty regular basis. We met for 2 days last month, and then we had a follow-up meeting actually today. And one of the things that we've been trying to do is formulate a plan on how we're able to support each other as districts in the event of a catastrophic event in one of our districts. So what we're trying to do is compile a list of resources that districts have available throughout the county, as well as a list of partner districts who would be trained and called upon for immediate assistance if needed. For example, if we had a catastrophe that occurred here during the school day, Dr. Gaybauer from Mount Pleasant would be on call. I would pick up the phone and I would say, Dr. Gaybauer, I need nurses, counselors, a school bus, yourself, and maybe a principal to help us with logistical things, first aid, triage, and transportation, or whatever the case may be. And then mutually, I'm doing those kinds of things for him. We have a day list and a night list as well, because some of our superintendents don't live in proximity to where they work. So for example, I'm on Jeanette's night list, but I'm not on their day list. So that's one of the things that we're working on, and we'll continue to fine tune that as the year rolls on. I'd like to read a letter to you that we received yesterday, as a matter of fact, and this is from the Consortium for Public Education. Dear Dr. Molnar, enclosed, please find a donation in the amount of $75,000 to the Southmoreland School District from the EITC program via the Scottdale Bank and Trust Company. The consortium is happy to send you these funds as an approved educational improvement organization in the EITC program. Our consortium is approved to accept funds that enhance student leadership, career exploration, and literacy development. So we ask that you use these dollars accordingly. We're very proud of the Scottdale Bank and Trust Company for investing in the important job of public education. Best wishes for the excellent use of these funds. We hope that they are helpful in achieving the challenges and goals that you have set for your students. We would very much like to receive a brief summary of how you used your donation, as well as reactions on your expenditures brought from students, family, staff, or board members. Sincerely, Linda Crowshore. So I would certainly echo her thoughts about Scottdale Bank and Trust over the years. I think we've received donations from Scottdale Bank and Trust that approach, if not exceed, $1 million. And we're certainly grateful to have an educational partner in the community that supports our mission, vision, values, and goals here in the district. So we extend our thanks to Scottdale Bank and Trust as well. And the last item I have on my report has to do with a tax appeal, and we would ask that you approve this resolution. The board authorizes the appointment of Robert Nell and Kelly Riley Nell, Barnett and Associates of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to provide professional real estate valuation services for the above litigation as follows: review of owner's appraisal and documents and consultations with the solicitor for a fixed fee of $500. And that is a resolution for tax assessment litigation for Scottdale Housing Limited Partnership, tax map number 30-0206-0287, 391, and 600.
Need a motion? Motion by Mrs. Rhodes. Need a second? Second by Mr. Miller. Questions? Questions from the audience? Roll call, please.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Polakowski?
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodes? Mr. Alt?
Yes.
Mr. Beistel? Mr. Calero? Mrs. Love? Mr. Benz?
Yes, motion passes 8-0 with one absent.
That concludes my report, Mr. President.
Thank you. Solicitor's report.
Just heard it from the superintendent.
You're welcome.
Citizens' comments.
Guys, Jan Kiefer, 628 Homestead Avenue. Just real small things here tonight on what I heard. Of course, I'm always interested in the curriculum here, and of not being in the classrooms or having an opportunity. I sort of flying blind, but the overall direction of your curriculum I do see, and I would encourage people to opt out of the testing and to follow the people nationwide that are taking that path. On what I heard tonight, though, was an example of that when this agricultural van comes through. I wasn't there to hear what happened. You were, Gail. Tell me, and I have plenty of time here tonight, did they talk about the pesticides and herbicides and manure runoffs that are ruining the Great Lakes, the Gulf of Mexico, and most of our rivers around here? All right, I'll take that as a no. Did they talk about the gross subsidies and the games that these mega farmers, these aren't little farmers, these are corporate farms, all the subsidies for not doing anything? Did they even bring up the genetically modified issue? They're banned in other countries and states in America. It's a big political and big money is going into that issue. I wonder if they talked about that, Gail? Yeah. Okay, I think you're missing my point.
The difference between using Crayola crayons that we all used when we were kids and a new type of crayon that they're using to make, they're using soybeans to manufacture. She tried to show them the difference between the two, and in my opinion, I didn't think there was that much of a difference between the two.
Between the two what?
Between the two crayons. That was the gist of the program. She didn't get into the depths of this. This was fourth graders.
Okay.
This wasn't a bunch of scientists sitting around in a room. These were fourth graders.
No, I'm not a scientist, neither are you, and this isn't. The podium isn't a place for scientific things. But let me just list my list here, because this would apply in your high school science classes. And again, don't have opportunity to be in there. So are we discussing these things? Let's just change the venue then. Are they talking about the meat and dairy and the eggs and the health studies that have demonstrated why we shouldn't be consuming those in the levels that we are, and the animal rights issues of those chickens on the iPads for 2 years. Chicken lives on the size of an iPad, and you know, we give those eggs to the kids in the, all right. I'm not going to exhaust that one. Just two other quick things. And on the funding, you know, a lot of the money is included in the pensions that we're doing for the teachers, and I'm not going to get into that whole issue, but I would challenge the teachers that are sitting here tonight to tell us the ethical considerations that they have where that money is being put. And I think that's part of the school board's question too. I think you'd be surprised, and I don't think anyone's going to give me that answer. And then of course a lot of the money is going into the health care, and you know, that's just a nightmare in my thing of a dysfunctional system. And last but not least, on the mission statement, it sounds great for a church school or a military school, but I didn't hear one thing tonight, or, you know, I listened real carefully before. There was no critical dimension to that. Like if they tell you you're going to eat this for lunch and you can't have unsweetened almond milk, but you can have diet soda, you know, you weren't demonstrating it. You would stand up and question that with critical. And I think children, you know, our student representatives, you really need to question authority at different times, and there you go, and respect authority. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kiefer.
Anything else from the board? Any motion to adjourn? Motion by Mrs. Rhodes, second. Second by Mr. Calero. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes. Good night. Thanks. Drive safe.